Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for the full moon in Scorpio, which is happening on May 7th at 5:45 a.m. Central Standard Time. So I suppose if you live down under, it might be on the 8th. I'm trying to think. I think you're 16 hours ahead of me. No, it might even be everybody on the same day. Is that possible? Maybe, because it's so early my time. So this is the full flower moon. And it's going to be a supermoon as well, which means that it's going to be larger than it normally is. Not as large as some of the other ones that we've had in recent months. And this is apparently the last supermoon of 2020. So although I've never really found out exactly how this affects us from an energetic level, I'm assuming that it just makes it more potent. The full flower angle is connected to Native American culture, so obviously if you're down under, you're not having, well, maybe there's flowers. There's flowers in the fall, so I wonder if that works for the fall. I haven't really thought too much on that, but if you're in the northern hemisphere, and especially in North America, this is the time when flowers bloom. It's pretty self-explanatory. Now, it's interesting. I did go to this website. I just kind of like, I'm going to say DuckDuckGo'd it because I don't use Google, to try to see if there was more depth to this. So I came across this site, timeanddate.com, and they say that it's not just the Native Americans, but the Europeans in the Northern Hemisphere where they have these names for the moon. So there's other names too. And I should have remembered this. There's the corn planting moon, the milk moon, and the hare moon. And so they're pretty self-explanatory. So these are times when these things are coming into fruition, if you will. And the interesting thing is they mentioned wildflowers that blossom in May in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's funny because I noticed certain flowers, kind of like those perennials, we have the daffodils in April and the tulips. Haven't seen too many tulips this year, though. I'm recording this in April. But there's these beautiful kind of lilac-colored flowers. And I'm not like a big flower expert, so I don't know the names of them. But they were talking about some of these. They said bluebells. I wonder if those are what I'm thinking of. Indigo. That's a possibility because there's also these deep kind of bluish purple flowers, so maybe those are the indigo. Lupine or lupine, sundrops, anemone, violets. Okay, now I know what violets look like, so I don't know about these other ones. And they even said wild garlic. So I just love this kind of stuff. I thought that would be interesting to know the other names. Somebody said Mother's Moon. It's funny, we have Mother's Day in May. But the milk moon, not sure where that comes from. So this is the moon in Scorpio, 17 degrees of Scorpio. Now, interestingly, the number 17 reduces to an 8. So that kind of, Scorpio is the 8th house. 8 is the number of worldly power. In the Tarot, the Strength card corresponds to number 8. And, the Rider-Waite deck and some other decks, at least. And so there is that power, that strength that is associated with the number 8, as well as financial wealth and, money power, monetary power, material power. And here we have the sun opposing that moon in Taurus, which is the ruler of the second house of earned income. So that opposition is between two houses that are associated with money. Scorpio is associated with other people's money. So the tug of war between autonomy and kind of cooperation, or in some cases, greed and shared resources. And I find it very interesting right now, what we're dealing with, at least at the time of this recording, in the last week of April, with a global situation where resources are sometimes being hoarded, being taken. So that's kind of like not cooperating, like me, I need for myself, and I'm going to have it. So that's when we're talking about excess and saying like the shared, we're all in this together, as they say. And so, I have to think about other people besides myself. So when the full moon is in Scorpio, I mean, a full moon is intense enough. So you can imagine how it is when it's in Scorpio and what that can bring up. Certainly because of what Scorpio represents. Scorpio represents what lies beneath, and so this can be a great time for secrets being revealed, for revelations, and this can apply to the collective. And certainly with what we have been experiencing, one of the most upsetting angles of this is feeling controlled. And because Pluto is in Capricorn, the feeling has been that we are controlled that we have the potential to be controlled by these forces. And you can see how quickly this can come about. And but this is the interesting thing about Pluto. It's also about destruction. So those structures that are rotten to the core are going to be toppled over, and we're seeing this as we live every day. Even so, it's kind of like a paradoxical situation, which is how life operates in general. We're seeing the control, but we're seeing the change. We're seeing the dismantling of things. And so what has to happen with the individual is they have to be willing to not just go through the motions, but really live life intentionally and consciously, and look around and see what is being done, and search for information that is not necessarily being just put out there for the mass consumption. Because Pluto, Scorpio, is about conspiracy theories. It's about all of these things, and the full moon can bring these out in the open, and no longer are they considered conspiracy theories. They are secrets being revealed, and about how we have been controlled. And the other thing, too, about this, when we look at some of the aspects that are occurring at this time, there's a revolutionary energy. And so I really wasn't even necessarily planning to make this video. I haven't been doing these full moon videos very much anymore. But I felt the idea, I felt like I should do one. And when I actually look at this, I see that Mars is in Aquarius, which is about not, to me, it's about rebelling against conformity and being a radical, being a revolutionary. I'm thinking of another word, being rebellious, I guess. But there are a bunch of squares to Mars. The Sun squares Mars, the Moon squares Mars, and Mercury squares Mars. Now, what this suggests, now here I am recording this only 2 weeks before, well, that's actually quite a ways away. I'm trying to think. No, it's less than that, because it's the 27th. It's going to be about 10 days from now. And a lot can happen in 10 days. So if you're listening and it's the 1st of May or the 4th of May, you never know what has transpired, by then. So just keep that in mind. And I think that it's going to be building, especially as we get into May, that kind of intensity. And sometimes when you have a very powerful full moon, you can feel it days in advance. I certainly have. And sometimes it's not really even that big of a deal, but I think this will be. And I think this might even be a turning point where, because like if I break down the number 17, its components are 1 and 7. And 1 represents autonomy, the self. 7 represents a turning point. So, you put it together and we have this power, but it's coming from a turning point in our individual journeys that is causing us as a collective to rebel against tyranny or against whatever it is that we feel is trying to control us. Now, that does not mean that I'm saying, oh yes, go out and do something. Absolutely not, because actually there are a lot of squares to Mars, which means it can be a volatile situation. But I'm always talking about the internal process when I'm discussing these things. However, of course it can spill out into the external reality. For sure. I'm just saying that people feel, some people go along with the program and then you impose one more rule and then that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and then they completely disavow whatever is being suggested. So we're in this power struggle, in other words, with forces that we may not know, that are kind of keeping themselves very well hidden. And so we don't know quite what to, who is who and what is what. The moon is opposing Mercury. So the emotional self, being in Scorpio and being, all of that depth, which can be very uncomfortable, because the reason that it is so undercover is because the emotions are very, it's kind of like the dark side of the emotions. And so people who have a natal moon in Scorpio, of course, you will really, feel intense at this time, but how your emotional nature is anyway. And the rest of humanity will find out temporarily when this moon in Scorpio comes into town. And so a lot of these hard angles to Mars mean that the people who are already feeling like they want to break free, maybe even more. And who knows, maybe there will be things that happen covertly to try to encourage people to act out. And this is another reason why people have to always be very careful about who is trying to manipulate them, to get them to act a certain way, because that could just be in order to increase the control, to have an excuse to have even more control. So I guess what I'm saying about this full moon is that it will be emotionally intense, but it'll also be a sense of urgency. I feel like some people will feel like, I have to act, and you have to restrain yourself. You have to think about it, because these are hard angles to Mars, and they are not necessarily coming from the right place. They may be coming from the ego, with the sun, where the person feels like a sense of, hey, I'm, how dare you do this to me? I'm, special, and not realizing that this is happening to everybody and kind of taking it personally. The moon can indicate that the emotions are heightened, and so people are acting rashly. And this is something that always is important to note when you're dealing with making or taking action, is that you have to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. It's funny because in my particular natal chart, I have a lot of nice angles to Mars, like trines and sextiles. And I always say to people when I'm looking at their personal charts, if you have squares like to the moon, Mercury, Sun to Mars, really be aware of how you are behaving in life, because there can be a tendency to be very overbearing and like overly competitive, insecure. So you're kind of like getting angry, being very emotionally volatile. That can be Moon square Mars blowing up because you're being quote unquote triggered by something. So this is these transits can apply in a similar way, to if you have this natally. Mercury square Mars mouthing off to the wrong person. So watch what you say. Watch how you behave. Don't run on emotion. Don't act on emotion. Be deliberate, in other words, when you at this time. Because, just in and of itself, having the moon in Scorpio can heighten our emotional responses. And I have seen with my own eyes on numerous occasions where a full moon brings out crazy behavior, and sometimes even days in advance. And I would not be surprised if this is no exception, or if this is heightened being a supermoon. So suffice it to say, we want to exercise caution during this time. But by the same token, Mars is trining the North Node, which makes me think that there are things that we can do and that we will do that are part of our destiny. And this is something that, when I saw that, it made my heart sing, because I do think that we are here at this time for this purpose, and that this is part of the awakening of humanity from a lot of ignorance, a lot of lower vibration, So by no means am I suggesting to be afraid of this full moon. I think that this will, it's funny, full flower moon, flowering, flowering our consciousness, even on the material level, a higher state of life, being able to live at a better level than we are right now. And so some of the other things that are happening here, that seem like they are good. We have trines between the Sun and Pluto, and Mercury and Pluto. This is great for understanding our personal power and how our thoughts anchor us in our power. In other words, even if you feel that these powers that be are clamping down, that you understand that you're a sovereign soul, and that you are not, you're not believing the hype, that you know who you are, that you're standing in your own power, and it's coming very easily at this time. Jupiter is in conjunction with Pluto, and so is Saturn. Saturn, Pluto, that's kind of those structures. But, it could mean that it's stabilizing, that it's not, even though people, some forces are trying to stir things up, everything is secured. Jupiter in conjunction with Pluto, to me, is understanding how we go through life and experience life, understanding, that this is actually good for material blessings, and it depends on where it falls in your chart, but that can be about really bringing forth that kind of perhaps material wealth. So there's a lot to be said, and again, with the Sun in Taurus, that is something to definitely take note of. And So the sun will be in conjunction with Mercury, and we will be speaking our truth as it relates to us. And it will be very, because it's in Taurus, it's going to be very clear, very down to earth, very accessible. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that you enjoyed this and have a great super full flower moon, I guess. Take care. Bye.